So initially I was pointed towards talking on Rahu, but as we'll see, it's applicable to Ketu. So I wanted to start actually by a little bit more on this topic. Before the break, we heard a very nice presentation on the comments or the shloka in Surya Siddhanta that talks about the 8 states of motion. Fortunately, he left it to me to mention the teachings in Parashara. There's a particular shloka, or actually 3 shlokas in Parashara, in the Shadbala chapter. And I'm actually, I studied this a long time ago. I mean, all of my software is based on Parashara and the other classical texts. So when I got to this one, it's a bit mysterious. Actually, in the Surya Siddhanta, he says that nobody really understands this topic. Obviously, Khandewal studied it carefully, which is very interesting. But if you look in the translation, in the English translations of Parashara, it's definitely not terribly clear. For one thing, it's not giving the actual definitions of these various terms. So I was studying it for this class. I found it very interesting, actually, because I realized that there's a great deal more in the Sanskrit than to be found in the translation. So I just wanted to discuss this a little bit. So he starts with his shloka. He says, Shashti Vakragata. So the point is given immediately that the power of the Vakra condition is full power. 60 means 60 virupas, or points. And it's typically the maximum. So none of the other states of motion get given the same strength as Vakra, which is very interesting. Then he mentions Anuvakra, and he says Dala. Dala means half. The only things he mentions are Shashti, Dala, Pada, and Padonam. So one has to understand it from this. So of course he's saying half, everyone understands that means half of 60, which is fine. That's clear. Then Vikala. Vikala is the same thing as Kutiya. Normally it's understood to be the same as Kutiya. I mean, that's the norm. The meaning is essentially the same. So he says this is Pada, which means a quarter. These are the strengths that he's assigning. Then he says Bhukti Syad. This is not mentioned in the translation. What does this Bhukti Syad mean? And Bhukti is a sort of technical term in Jyotish. It's got other meanings, but in Jyotish it means the daily motion. So in other words, if the planet's moving at a mean speed, that's the speed it's going at. So what he's telling us actually is quite brilliant, and this, I feel almost embarrassed that all these years I never paid attention to this Sanskrit shloka, is that all these different fractions are also in terms of the daily motion. So in a way, he's actually giving us a clue for the definition, not just of the strengths, but actually of what these states represent. So he's saying Vikala is a quarter. So it's a bit, mysterious, really, about what this Vikala really is, because if we take it as stationary, that should be 0 strength. But he's giving it 15. So this, I'm not going to give you an answer on this. This is something that we all have to contemplate on. And then we have Manda. So this is the states of Vakra, Anuvakra, Vikala. This is the traditional states of retrogression. And then the planet starts going forwards. So this is the list that is given in the first shloka. So Manda, which means slow, is again Pada, or a quarter. Mandatara, which means literally beyond Manda. It's always interpreted as very slow, but it really means whatever state is beyond Manda, which could be faster, in fact. This is the confusion. People don't know what to do with this Mandatara. Are we going to sort of move it back and stick it before the Manda? Or does it really go after the Manda? is its strength, because he says the strength is dala, which means half. So in order to try and understand that as very slow, the translator has said, okay, it means half of a quarter, because Manda was said to be a quarter. So, and Manda Tara is a half, so that's how you get 7.5. You look in the book, it says 7.5, but it's not obvious that that's what Parashara means. And then Sama we had mentioned in the Surya Siddhanta. It says Madhya actually in some places. So again, this is Dala. And then Chara is Padona. So this is something interesting because at least it's fairly easy to understand. He specifically mentions Bhukti again. So what he's telling us is that this Chara movement is actually 3/4 of the mean daily motion. And this is a kind of peak strength. So the two peak strengths are the full retrogression, Vakra, not the half retrogression, but the full retrogression. And when the speed comes up to about 3/4 of the forward motion, then it kind of peaks. Because when it goes beyond that in Atichara, then the planet's starting to move fast. And it's a well-known concept in Jyotish that a fast planet is not very strong. It loses strength. It becomes what they say, BT or anxious. So this is interesting, I thought. I thought it was interesting. Anyhow, but it's giving us a clue, certain clues at least we can understand out of this. The power of retrogression exceeds the power of a forward-moving planet. And a forward-moving planet shouldn't be moving too fast. That's another thing to watch out for, because if a planet is moving fast, it's lost about half of its strength. Now, that was the first shloka. Then the two more shlokas. It's essentially the first shloka, he just lists the different states without giving any detail. And then the next two shlokas, he goes through them again in a slightly different order, giving all this details that we've just mentioned. So we don't have to review that again. But notice the order of at least where the Sama comes is different. So what does that mean? I'm not going to try and explain because I don't fully understand. I mean, this is something that actually everyone has always had trouble understanding over the centuries. But if we think deeply about it, perhaps we will. All right, so we know about Surya Siddhanta. And in the Surya Siddhanta, it's mentioned in the commentary that some gentleman in the 19th century came up with this idea. Well, I'm not saying he came up with this idea. He reported this idea, which is no doubt from the astrologers, which is that Anuvakra is when a planet retrogrades into a previous sign. So if you read Jyotish, you will find this concept quite commonly mentioned. Where it originates, I'm not quite sure, but there's nothing in Parashara to suggest that. Anuvakra is just a state of motion relative to the mean motion. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that these are different points of view. And as far as there's nothing in Surya Siddhanta or Parashara to suggest this Anuvakra explanation, it must be from some other text. So then the question of, is Kutiya stationary? There's this concept in the Surya Siddhanta commentary that it should be moving in latitude but not moving in longitude. But normally I think we have to take Kutiya or Vikala as being stationary because the meaning of the word is deficient in motion. All right. So let's get on to the Rahu and Ketu. Now, I'm focusing on Rahu because that's what was suggested to me. And we normally treat Rahu as being retrograde. I mean, that's the mean motion. So the mean motion is always retrograde. And one of the names of Rahu is Om Apasabhyagataye Nama. This is from the list of 108 traditional names or mantras, which you'll find in my book, Yoga of the Planets. and it means moving in a retrograde manner. So this is specifically mentioned as a characteristic of Rahu. And this, along with other references in the text, give us a very strong sense that we should use the mean motion for Rahu. I've written this, some text on this particular mantra, and one thing I mentioned is that Rahu and Ketu move like a truck going the wrong way on a freeway or highway. So this is why it's very frightening when you're driving along and suddenly there's this big truck coming in the opposite direction. This is very frightening, right? So that's typical. So that's why, the retrogression focuses on the consequence of past actions. We've discussed that before in the context of Shani. But obviously, Rahu and Ketu, since they're perpetually retrograde, are perpetually bringing us the consequence of past actions. And that's why they're said to be the karmic planets. I mean, obviously, every planet is related to our karmas, but somehow Rahu and Ketu give a more extreme version, or dramatic version of the karmic experience. And that causes transformation, upheaval, and therefore delays, potential delays in situations. So Rahu and Ketu are not independent. They're always an axis, and they're moving together. But because they're in different signs, then each has its own results, each has its own dashas, and so forth. But if we just assume that they're retrograde all the time, then we can take all the Jyotish that relates to Rahu and Ketu, and then we can apply them. And all of this is well known as far as you can understand these things. So I can't, get into that today, but I thought since Rahu is the breaker of boundaries and likes doing something sort of bit, different, we should look at something that people don't really discuss very much that could be relevant. So this is what happens in my software if you turn the nodes to true motion rather than mean motion. So then in the retrogression graph, then you see suddenly Rahu is getting split up into regions of direct motion and retrograde motion. And you'll see that this is the current situation right now. And you'll see that there is mostly retrogression, and occasionally there's these periods which are colored orange where there's true motion, and there's a sort of pattern. You can see the pattern to it. Obviously, the whole thing is a specific cycle with its own mathematical harmonic basis. So right now, we're actually in a period of direct motion of the nodes until the 10th, tomorrow. So let's see. It's very interesting to look at this as just out of interest, we can look into this as a phenomenon. So I've got a couple of examples. Now, this is a famous example. This is September the 11th, 2001. It was outstandingly terrible day, and there's very few things that we can compare it with. And it was a day when the nodes were stationary. So the nodes went stationary, and then they went retrograde in the early hours of the 11th, after having been direct on the 10th. So there was something, who knows? I'm just presenting this out of interest. You can think about it. But there's something going on. Now, we've discussed earlier that this sort of stationary condition when planets are changing has some kind of special power. It's not the sort of virium or strength that is being described in the, say, in those Parashara slokas so much, but there is something very potent about it, which you'll find if you study charts. And this is one, maybe coincidence, possibly. So I started looking at other terrorist incidents like the bombing in London, the attacks recently in Sri Lanka, they don't have this, this situation. But then if you look at the charts for those events, they're not dominated by Rahu. And if we look at the chart for this event, what we find, it is dominated by Rahu. This is Virgo rising. Now, those of you who study with Sanjay would understand that Virgo is the Mula Trikona of Rahu. Virgo has a lot of Rahu energy. And if you take that as the case, then you'll see that Rahu, acting as the Lagna Lord, is in a parivartana with Mercury in the Lagna. And of course, it's conjunct Moon and Jupiter. So there's some very potent influence of Rahu in this chart, what to speak of the Ketu Mongol story in Sagittarius, in Mula. I mean, this is the Mula thing was the thing that I was most worried about in the weeks running up to September 11th. Because when I thought when the moon gets to Rahu, it's going to be bad, you know. So I remember coming down the stairs, my mom's house, and I walked in, and she was watching the TV, and there was the whole drama was going on. I thought, oh my God, it's the 11th. So there we go. Anyway, it's a very Rahu day. Now let's have a look at something else. All right, and you see this clearly, but this is the day that Hitler attacked Poland. So what we can see is he launched his attack on the 1st. The Rahu was retrograde, and it went direct on the 3rd. So what happened on the 3rd? The 3rd is the day that France and Britain declared war on Germany. So really the war started on the 3rd. Hitler started with the energy of the retrograde Rahu, but the fight back started with the direct. It turned direct. So if we see the chart, so what have we got here? We've got Rahu in Libra, and we've got debilitated Shani, of course, with Ketu in Aries, and Rahu is the 7th lord. So actually, the 7th lord represents the other side, really, the enemies. And in fact, I don't think it's, yeah, what you can see is that this, Rahu is in its own nakshatra, by the way. So the whole drama played out during Shani. You can see that. The moon was in nakshatra of Shani, Uttara Bhadrapada. And so in Shani Rahu, it was all over. He died, that was the end of the war. See that? Now, if we have a look quickly at Hitler's chart, so we see that he was also born the day before the nodes went direct. Interesting, huh? And in his chart, we see Rahu in Gemini, where it's considered to be exalted, in the 9th house, which is a very dangerous place for Rahu. And the whole drama of him ruling Germany was all during his Rahu Dasha. So it's interesting. I'm not putting forward some new theory here. I'm just putting forward something I thought people might find interesting. I mean, Rahu has to come up with something new, doesn't it? So this is something worth thinking about. Okay.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Is that the end of the presentation, Doctor?
Yeah, this little bit.
Thank you so much. It was those case studies were quite breathtaking and really goes to show you the kind of impact that the nodes have, not just on our individual lives, but on the world as a, you know, as an entity in itself, as a consciousness, as we're moving together. There's a huge influence on the nodes, which is this war of the consciousness. And I see with September 11th, there was a war of consciousness. The Nazi regime was a war against consciousness. So again, you find these wars against consciousness right around the times the nodes are going stationary.
Exactly.
It's fascinating research. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting.